A woman who walks alone is often thought to be lost, but she may simply be free. Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin with a paradox. In a world that fears the unknown and mistrusts the solitary, the image of a woman who chooses to live alone, without a man, stands as both a threat and a mystery. Society asks, why is she alone? But the real question is, what does her aloneness reveal about us? In a society that has long conditioned people to equate a woman's value with her proximity to a man, the image of a woman living alone often triggers discomfort or confusion. But to equate solitude with lack is a profound misunderstanding, not just of the woman herself, but of what it means to be whole. Independence, especially for a woman, is too often interpreted as a state of incompleteness, as though she is simply waiting to be made whole by the arrival of another. Yet this notion is rooted more in cultural conditioning than in psychological truth. The idea that a woman without a man must be lonely or somehow less than stems from centuries of narrative in which her role was defined in relation to others. In literature, religion, and social expectation, she was the helpmate, the nurturer, the caretaker, the one who supports but does not stand alone. So when a woman chooses to live alone, to walk her path without a man beside her, she breaks an archetype. And when archetypes are broken, society often responds with suspicion or dismissal. But in truth, many women who live alone do so from a place of deep inner strength. Their solitude is not a gap to be filled, but a space to be honored. It is the canvas upon which they paint their own lives, free from the distortion of roles they did not choose. Rather than being empty, their lives can be richly full of creativity, of self-discovery, of work that matters, of friendships, of quiet joy. It is a life that does not depend on romantic attachment for validation. This independence reflects something deeply Jungian, the process of individuation. It is the journey toward becoming a whole and integrated self, not through fusion with another, but through honest engagement with one's own inner world. For such a woman, solitude is not exile, it is home. She is not lacking, she is self-contained. Not isolated, but in dialogue with herself. And this is not a lesser existence, it is a powerful one. The challenge lies not with the woman, but with the lens through which she is viewed. To recognize her wholeness requires that we expand our understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life. She is not a fragment. She is not a half. She is a full expression of what it means to live with purpose, without needing her worth reflected in someone else's eyes. And that in itself is a quiet revolution. The way society views women who live alone is deeply shaped by cultural archetypes, unconscious patterns or symbols that have been passed down for generations. These archetypes often present women in roles that are relational: the wife, the mother, the maiden, the lover. Each of these identities implies a connection to someone else, most often a man. As a result, when a woman chooses to live independently, without the presence of a male partner, she disrupts these long-standing narratives. Her autonomy confuses the societal script, because she does not fit neatly into the roles that have historically defined feminine identity. This confusion often leads to projection. Instead of seeing the woman for who she is, people respond to the archetype they expect her to fulfill. If she is not a wife, she must be waiting. If she is not a mother, she must be unfulfilled. If she is not partnered, she must be lonely. These assumptions are not objective truths. They are reflections of the cultural lens that still struggles to understand a woman as whole without relational context. She is not seen in her fullness, but through the filter of what she is presumed to lack. These archetypes are powerful because they live not only in social institutions, but in the collective unconscious. They influence how we write stories, how we raise children, how we interpret behavior. A woman who lives alone is often unconsciously cast in roles that carry a shadow: the spinster, the witch, the woman who couldn't keep a man. These are not harmless images. They carry centuries of judgment and misinterpretation. They obscure the reality that solitude can be a deliberate and empowered choice. The truth is that architects do not define reality. They shape perception. And when those perceptions go unexamined, they limit our understanding of human experience. Jung himself noted that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. In this case, the unconscious scripts about gender and partnership continue to inform our judgments, often without our awareness. To see beyond these archetypes requires effort. It demands that we look not just at the woman before us, but at the symbolic framework we are using to understand her. We must ask whether our discomfort lies in her choices or in our inherited belief that a woman's life gains value only in relationship to a man. Once we dismantle those inner narratives, we begin to see her clearly, not as a deviation, but as a full expression of what it means to live authentically. Solitude, when chosen consciously, can become a profound teacher. For a woman who lives alone, this space, away from external expectations, often becomes the ground upon which she meets herself fully, in the absence of constant relational feedback, of being mirrored through the eyes and needs of others. She is invited into an encounter with her own depths. Rather than escaping life, she may be engaging it more honestly, turning inward to explore the layers of her psyche that are often neglected in the noise of daily interaction. This journey inward reflects the Jungian concept of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the self. For many, this path is painful, messy, and uncertain, but for a woman who lives alone, the conditions for this inner work are uniquely present. Without the distraction of roles that demand emotional labor for others, she is free to devote energy to self-inquiry. She can listen to her dreams, attend to her intuition, and confront the shadow aspects of her personality, the fears, the wounds, the unmet desires that often go unaddressed in a life built around external validation. Such solitude is not empty or sterile. It becomes a space of creativity, healing, and transformation. The silence she experiences is not void of meaning. It is full of messages, symbols, and insight, if she dares to listen. She may discover parts of herself that were silenced in the presence of others. Her solitude becomes a sanctuary, not a sentence. It is the place where the inner voice grows stronger, where the self, the central Jungian archetype representing psychic totality, begins to emerge with greater clarity. This deep connection to the inner world often fosters a different kind of richness. She might develop rituals, artistic expressions, intellectual passions, or spiritual practices that anchor her in a life of meaning. Her sense of identity becomes less reliant on societal approval and more grounded in self-awareness. And through this, she may come to feel more authentically connected to the world, not through roles or expectations, but through presence. Living alone does not mean living disconnected. On the contrary, it can mean living in conscious connection, with oneself, with nature, with the rhythms of life, often drowned out by the demands of others. It is not a retreat from intimacy, but a recalibration of what intimacy can be. This inner companionship becomes a wellspring of strength, clarity, and peace, allowing her to meet the world not from a place of need, but from a place of inner sufficiency. When a woman chooses to live alone, society often responds with projection. People rarely see her as she is. They see what they fear, misunderstand, or judge. They assign motives to her solitude without asking her what it means to her. They assume heartbreak, bitterness, rejection, or failure. She becomes a symbol rather than a person, a mirror onto which others cast their own insecurities and assumptions. This response reveals less about her and more about the collective discomfort with a woman who lives on her own terms. These projections are not random. They arise from deeply embedded narratives that equate a woman's fulfillment with her attachment to a man. When that attachment is visibly absent, people rush to explain it in familiar ways. She must be damaged, or she probably couldn't find someone. These judgments are attempts to protect the existing worldview. A worldview in which a woman's happiness is not only expected to include a man, but to revolve around one. Her independence threatens that narrative, and so it is recast as a deficiency. But these assumptions do not reflect the reality of many women's lives. The truth is that countless women who live alone have chosen to do so not because they failed at love, but because they succeeded at finding themselves. They have refused to settle for relationships that diminish them. They have prioritized peace over performance, authenticity over approval, yet this choice is often invisible to those who can only interpret female solitude through a lens of lack. This misunderstanding is compounded by the discomfort people feel when faced with those who are not easily categorized. A woman who lives alone and is content defies social logic. She forces others to confront the possibility that what they consider essential might actually be optional. Her life raises uncomfortable questions. What if fulfillment doesn't require partnership? What if solitude can be joyful? What if wholeness doesn't come from someone else? Facing these questions is difficult, so many people choose instead to pathologize the woman herself. This protects the norm, even as it dismisses her truth. But to truly see her means suspending judgment and letting go of projection. It means allowing for the possibility that a woman can choose herself, and that this choice is not a failure but a strength. To understand her is to expand the definition of what a meaningful life looks like, not just for her, but for all of us.